We'd like to welcome you back to the Digitalacha podcast, sponsored by the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. As you recall, Digitalacha was developed to inspire creativity and enable educators to network in real time and share professional learning experiences that ensures equity, access, and opportunity for all in remote areas or any areas, regardless of zip codes. Through KVEC's learning platform on theholler.org, a collection of free resources and online professional development tools are available to aid in virtual learning and teaching in non-traditional ways. And we invite you to visit theholler.org and view those resources and the other things that we have there. Also, part of our goal is to network across states, organizations, and regions. And to continue that networking, I was recently listening in on a webinar sponsored by Digital Promise, and I heard our guest today speaking to a modern classroom project. So I'm happy to introduce Kareem Farah, who is the Chief Executive Office of the Modern Classroom Project. So welcome to this podcast, and I'm glad you're able to join us today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to share more.
So during the webinar, you were talking about this is relatively new, and you had a group of teachers educators that came together. I think we've got to do something to get more professional learning to our teachers based on their needs. So I'm here to learn from you. So tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got started, and how this work has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an educator. I was teaching in high need environments, high diversity of learning levels. I started my teaching career in Hawaii, actually teaching Native Hawaiian and Native Polynesian communities, and then moved to DC, where I was teaching in a big city public school system. Certainly had a high diversity of learning levels, a lot of truancy challenges, a lot of trauma was going on. And I was a high school math teacher and just realized that the traditional approach to teaching was a rather ineffective one, particularly once you're supporting students with unique needs, right? When students who aren't able to attend class every single day, they might be behind multiple grade levels in certain content areas, might have skill kind of gaps that they need support on, and a high level of trauma. So kind of the assumption that I think a lot of traditional classrooms are built on, where every kid just shows up on time, they're ready to learn the next lesson, they sit down in their seats, and then you get started, is just an unrealistic reality for most educators across the country, and certainly was for me. So I sought to kind of reinvent my classroom environment, starting with sort of eliminating the lecture. And it was actually my co-founder and I that were collaborating together. He was one floor up, same building. I think a lot of educational innovations are built by teachers collaborating with other teachers and just trying to figure out how to meet students' needs better. And we both had arrived on this idea that first you can eliminate the lecture. And the way that you do that is to actually build your own instructional videos. You don't need to find them on YouTube. You don't need to outsource that. You're the educator, you're the expert, you know your kids, you know your content, you can build your own instructional videos. From there, we found that when you replace lectures with instructional videos, you can then let students work at their own pace, which is so incredibly important when you're in these unique classroom environments where kids are not always there at the same time and certainly aren't learning at the same pace. And then ultimately, that leads to our final frontier, which is mastery-based grading. Once you can actually kind of create variable pacing in your classroom, now you can say, hey, student, you're actually still going to work on lesson 2 today, whereas your peer right here is going to go on to lesson 3 because they've mastered lesson 2. And that kind of turned into a codified model. It was a blended self-paced mastery-based model that was unique to sort of the ways that we executed it. And we didn't realize at the time that we were actually arriving at something that could scale and something that could turn into an organization. So I ended up winning DC Public Schools Most Innovative Educator in 2018. They built a little video about my classroom. That initial video captured folks' attentions. People were asking about it. Then Edutopia picked it up, built their own video about the model, which is probably the best way to understand it. And from there, it sort of went viral, and we realized we had a model that other educators wanted, and we should empower them to learn it. So we built the Modern Classrooms Project, a nonprofit. We run a free course, and we also run a virtual mentorship program. And we have thousands of educators that are in that free course and that are learning through our virtual mentorship program as we speak. And our sole goal as an organization is just to empower as many educators with our blended self-paced, mastery-based approach.
Yeah. Well, this is exciting to hear because just this conversation, I'm glad we're having this. And this is the first time you and I had a chance to have a real conversation. Just within our past, our recent podcast, the irony is we just spoke with Raymond Rodriguez with the Hawaii Teachers Standards Board, who left here to go to Hawaii to teach, and you've come back to DC from Hawaii. We've also had podcasts talking about trauma-informed education. with ripple effects through Alice Ray. We've had conversation about redeveloping and bringing online virtual learning experiences for our students. Well, not only for our students, but also for our teachers in kind of a democratized form of official learning so that we can have this and folks can do this at their own pace. So, and this is right up, this is great because it's exciting for me because this is right in our stream of conversation that we're having. So, in thinking about the Modern Classroom Project, and what makes this unique and how you're going to offer these delivery system that's based on student level. In addition to that question, part two is, how do you get teachers trained in this development for this new model?
Yeah, sure. So how we're different kind of has to do with each bucket, right? Because blended, self-paced, mastery-based, like those terms are just thrown around now like they're nothing in education. And some are tied together. Sometimes they're done in isolation. So first with blended instruction, as far as I know, we're actually the only organization that early on, years ago, invested in this idea that educators are their own video creators. For a while, right, blended and personalized learning was hitting the scene, but it was largely coming with packaged curriculum, external resources, right? Teacher just facilitates. And we saw two big issues with that. First, if you're teaching a group of students that are a broad variety of learning levels, those external resources assume that those kids have mastered all the skills up to that point, right? If I pull a Khan Academy video out in 8th grade math, Khan naturally has to assume that you've mastered everything up to that particular skill. But we know that's not actually what it looks like in the classroom. So first, we saw that many of our students just didn't find these external resources digestible. They had a multitude of questions and became quite frustrated. The second issue we saw is every great educator knows that relationships are the sole most important concept when you're building a classroom community. And what I saw very quickly, particularly with students who frankly didn't have a great experience with authority in the past, right? Authority wasn't necessarily trustworthy for them, didn't treat them the way that they deserve to be treated. So then suddenly they walk into my classroom and I have to earn their trust. And if they start to just watch someone else teach them, that trust is really hard to build. They started asking me questions like, what are you doing here? Why are you my teacher? How do I know you're the expert in the room? Some just simple questions that were not obvious to me when I tried to use external videos and then became quite clear when I started doing that. So that's that kind of first differentiator, right? The belief that educators can actually be the creators of their own instructional videos, which it reinforces this idea that tech cannot replace teacher, right? Teacher is ultimately the core key factor in student learning, and you can't replace it by outsourcing it. The second phase in self-pacing, a lot of organizations and a lot of instructional models bring up self-pacing. We believe deeply in self-pacing in chunks. So we don't think a student should actually be self-paced for the entirety of the school year. I think there's real harm there because if you're a student who struggles with self-regulation, self-awareness, you may not be great at self-pacing initially. So you need chunks, you need guardrails, you need to have fresh starts. Otherwise, kids that are great at it will fly. Kids that struggle with it will bottom out and lose confidence. And then ultimately, mastery-based grading. I can't think of, there's so many organizations that talk about competency-based and mastery-based grading. We're curriculum agnostic. So we think that there's a part about mastery-based grading that can be sort of deconstruction of standards and what constitutes mastery. But before you even get there, have you built a classroom environment and delivery model that even allows you to do this, right? What's the point in entertaining competency-based grading or mastery-based grading if kids don't have the ability to self-pace? So we're curriculum agnostic in that way. So that kind of addresses how we're different. We focus on instructional delivery, and we really believe deeply in the authenticity of the educator. The way that we train folks, first we believe in unrestricted access to tutorials and resources. So 20,000 educators are in a free course as we speak across 105 countries. In our Modern Classrooms podcast, we'll be interviewing a couple of teachers in Australia who've been doing our model beautifully for the last few months. So that's one way, right? Just go to that free course and learn. It's a self-guided experience. And then with schools and districts, and particularly individuals as well, who really want to get that comprehensive support and training, they enroll in our virtual mentorship program. It's $500 per teacher. Educators get paired with an actual mentor who does our model. They build a full student-ready unit, and they're getting one-on-one support as they go, one-on-one feedback on all the deliverables, and one-on-one coaching. And that's kind of our second tier of support for folks who really want to invest in rolling this out.
One of the things as I'm listening to this and the self-pacing and the mastery, and I think about how we've got to change the structure of how that school looks. How are you addressing this concept of time for mastery? Because often we look, well, the assessments all come at the same time. So how do you ensure that though they're self-paced, going to mastery, we're still already within that? I call it arbitrary, but because it's not based on what the kids need, it's based on what the timing needs. How do we address that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things. I mean, one, you can always have a kind of larger conversation around sort of how schools are structured, right? Like,
Mhm.
what are pacing guides? Why do they exist? Like, why do we have the expectation that there's these summative assessments that are given, X, Y, Z number of times a year? We operate under the assumption that we're not going to go in there and completely revamp the way grading systems and quarterly systems are going to work. So how do we empower educators to be innovative given the constraints? And the way that we reconcile this idea of pace is through lesson classifications. And it basically operates under this fundamental assumption that if I have 10 lessons in a unit and I know I have to give a summative assessment after a month, well, we all know that if we have a diversity learning levels in front of us, not every kid's going to be able to master every single lesson, right? That doesn't make any functional sense unless they're all on the exact same level. So instead, let's isolate which lessons are the must-dos, the most important lessons, which ones are the should-dos, and which ones are the aspire-to-dos. So some kids may only master the 6 lessons that are must-dos, while a peer masters all 10, including the aspire-to-dos. And that allows educators to create personalized pathways within a unit and still give it a summative assessment. And then a lot of folks will ask from there, well, then how is grading done? And really, again, in the belief that educators are the experts in the room and can customize, they decide, what are the policies. We have some teachers who say you can only get up to an 80% if you only do the must-dos. In my classroom, I would excuse kids completely. If I told them they didn't have to do a should-do or an aspire-to-do, is removed entirely from their grade. So it's really up to the educator. They understand the unique circumstances. They understand what kind of expectations they can layer on top of the students.
So as we're looking at the self-pacing, you also brought in trauma-informed teaching. And right now during COVID and other things we do have trauma happening to our students in and out of school, again. We here in Kentucky, we're back out for virtual. So within your system, how do you address the trauma aspect of this through the Modern Classroom project?
Yeah, and this is something we're actually continuing to improve upon, addressing it and calling it out. Because what we found is we do it really well. We don't necessarily articulate how we do it very well. It just happens naturally. Mm-hmm. Main reason why is we all know that to create a classroom that's trauma-informed, it has to be responsive and has to respect the unique needs of the individual. Mm-hmm. And what I always found as a traditional educator, when I still taught traditionally, is there was a constant battle between supporting a kid with trauma and making sure the class is orderly. Yeah. Kid walks in, tears might be flowing down their face. You can tell something happened to them. They seem off. And you're kind of battling this idea of like, I know that kid clearly needs something, but I got a class I got to get going, right? And that's just at its core, not trauma informed, right? It's the exact opposite. It's, I'm going to ignore your trauma because I have 25 kids and I don't want to disrupt the larger learning environment. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, when you create an environment that's self-paced, that isn't reliant on this live delivery of information, it allows you to pivot to student needs, academic or non-academic at any time, and ensure that that student and you don't know that it's disrupting the larger learning environment. Because it's incredibly unpleasant to be experiencing trauma and then to know you're also the source of a learning environment stopping, right? Someone comes in and you're like, hold on everyone, I got to take care of this kid. Yeah. Kid's like, I already feel off and now you're going to just put this on blast for everyone. And the teacher has no other choice, right? Or they can just ignore it entirely. So this idea of creating a space in the classroom for kids to ease in if they need to, or just pick up where they left off and keep running, allows educators to then personalize to the unique needs of students, have one-on-one conversations when necessary. And at that point, you then rely on the experts who know trauma, right? So if a student comes in and is suffering with trauma, go speak to that student, assess whether they're struggling. And then if it's the right time to seek out additional wraparound supports, you do that. And the beauty of that is it's not disruptive to the kid, the classroom, or yourself. So that's really how we execute that. And we have a partnership with Johns Hopkins, and they do all of our research. And one of the things they uncovered in our research report was, kids clearly expressed that they were getting more personal support and encouragement, which kind of speaks to that idea of trauma-informed teaching. And then the teachers clearly indicated, in comparison to control educators, they're able to provide one-on-one supports to students much more effectively, right? And those are the two levers that allow for trauma-informed teaching at its core.
And what I like hearing what you say, because what I get from this is you're providing up a safe place for students where trust is developed, the validation of what they're going through, and knowing that that support system is going to be there as they go through your system or through what your work. So thank you for that response. I do have a question. You mentioned some podcasts with folks in Australia. They're going to talk about that work that they're doing. So if you take Robert on as in this program, yep, what are the steps that I will go through to become a modern classroom project teacher?
Yeah, fantastic. So if you're in the virtual mentorship program, that sort of paid experience, either through a school district or individually. If you're a school district, we partner with the school district. We recruit the teachers. They enroll in cohorts, 20, 30, 50, 100 at a time, and they start the program. The program usually through a school district will launch with an opening webinar. If you come individually, you just immediately get enrolled. You learn about sort of what the expectations are, and then there's 5 assignments that usually take teachers about 25 to 30 hours in total to complete, but it's a self-paced journey. With our partnerships, we usually give 8 to 12 weeks. Individuals can go at any pace that they'd like. And the first assignment is building your first instructional video. Right? What is the first instructional video? And remember that educators are creating a unit. So this would be the first video of that unit. Submit that video into the system. Mentors then give feedback on a 72-hour turnaround time. And those videos, right, we're giving feedback on the research, length, engagement levels. Are there embedded questions? Do the slides evolve? Are there annotations and animations? Are you speaking fast or slow? What are other ways that you can kind of clean this up and refine it? And what are ways that it's already great? From there, we go into LMS plan. So what is your unit actually going to look like on your LMS? It doesn't matter what LMS you're using. You could build a free Google site, or you could be using Schoology, or you could be Microsoft Teams, or Google Classroom, or Canvas, right? What's the organization? Is it designed such that a student can go from lesson 1 to lesson 2 to lesson 3 without peppering you with questions about process? Because you don't want to be stuck in a self-paced classroom constantly answering process questions when the entire goal is for you to be answering content questions and building relationships with kids. From there, you're actually building a self-pacing plan. That includes the lesson classification phase, as well as the creation of a progress tracker. Are you using a personal tracker or a public tracker? What does that tracker look like? Is it easily digestible for kids and even parents? From there, you're going into the mastery plan. What's your mastery check for that first video? What's your assignment? And what are your classroom policies going to be around revision, reassessment, and reflection?
Okay.
And then your final frontier is the creation of the unit plan. So replicating that with the rest of your lessons and submitting a full unit plan.
Wow. That sounds exciting. So within this plan, as you're working through this, of course, we were on the Digital Promise webinar, and part of that conversation was talking about micro-credentialing. How does micro-credentialing play a part in the teacher learning components? Is that embedded? How does that work?
Yeah, so at the moment, when you finish your virtual mentorship program, you actually get a micro-credential at the onset. So there's a Digital Promise one, and then we also have an internal one that indicates that you know how to plan like a modern classrooms educator. Okay. And actually, we're in the process of shortly launching. So if you're watching this, in what is November 2020, we're in the process of building it. And in the not so distant future, we'll have a layered series of credentials. So you can be an implementer, you can be a planner, you can be a mentor. So there's actually a ladder there where you build up. But once you graduate from the virtual mentorship program, you have a micro-credential in planning. And then the real next step is now you got to implement the model. And if you can show us you're implementing, then you might get a credential for the implementer, and it keeps building from there.
So a lot in conversations we have with micro-credentials, one issue that always comes up is, we get so many folks who run out of assessors. Are you building your own assessors team within this network of folks you've created?
That's right. I mean, the beauty of our model, and one of the things I love about running the Modern Classrooms Project, is every single month we pay a bunch of teachers who are mentoring other teachers.
Yeah.
Right. So our actual biggest staff group is just other teachers who are working as part-time mentors. So when we think about the ability to kind of credential folks and building an internal team there, well, our educators are here. We pay them hourly. They're our mentors. They're the experts as well. So we can say, hey, we have 10 micro-credentials that need to be reviewed this week. People pick them up. They review them. They log their time, and we pay them. And we get to be compensating educators who we believe are truly underpaid at scale, right? So we actually get to provide an alternative revenue stream to educators and have an ongoing, growing number of folks who are experts in this who can actually review credentials as well. So
you mentioned Australia, you mentioned your work at DC. So where all have you expanded to? Where are the teachers coming from that work at this project?
Oh, well, I mean, the free course, 105 countries, so I couldn't tell you all of them, but a lot of countries. The virtual mentorship program, we have partnered with just over 25 school and district partnerships, again, as of November 2020. So we're in tons of states. We're in California, Washington State, Illinois. We're working on a partnership in Kentucky. We're in North Carolina. We're in Pennsylvania. We're all throughout the Midwest. We're in Texas, Colorado, New York State. So really tons of partnerships. What I've loved too about the way that we run our professional development is it doesn't rely on people being in the same place, which means we can reach schools and districts that I think are often shielded at times or just not able to access some of these big education reform and innovation efforts that go to these big cities, right? We have partnerships in rural communities with school districts that only support 500 to 1,000 students, but are really, really excited about innovation. And we have the opportunity to train them 10, 20, 30 teachers at a time and bring that innovation to that local community with ease. So we are spread across the country. We even have a partnership in Alaska and Hawaii at the moment. So we really do have partnerships all across the country. And it's an exciting way for us to see innovation spread from the bottom up, really. It's teacher driven.
Yeah. And being place-based is so important because it meets all those individual needs. So if I'm a district or a state or a country or whatever, I would like to try to get involved. How would I get in touch with you to see how to get into this project?
Yeah, so on our website where you see school and district partnerships, there's a partnership interest form. And as the CEO of the organization, whenever someone fills that partnership interest form, that lands directly in my inbox and I follow up and we schedule a call to really think through timing, execution, number of teachers, recruitment, and all that good stuff. We encourage folks to always just start in our free course as well. You can always just email me directly at kareem.farah@modernclassrooms.org. But the easiest way is just to go to our website and kind of see the diversity of programs we have to offer, right? A lot of folks will start with the free course, push that out to every teacher. And a lot of folks will say, look, I love this. I'm there. I'm ready. How do I get teachers enrolled? And you just fill out the partnership interest form.
That's awesome. And I'm going to follow up and do that. Look at it some already. I'm going to continue because your excitement during that webinar, it's the same excitement I'm here now. That's why I've got to get him on this podcast and talking about these great resources and hear about what's going on. I also invite you to go to our website at theholler.org because we're trying to implement some of the same strategies within the video, teachers videoing or innovation grants that we have. And so I invite you to look at that, look at the videos, and I can send you some things as well. Before we sign off for today, you have any final thoughts or any final comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, ultimately, what I always tell folks about the Modern Classrooms Project and why I think we're different and why I think we deeply believe that we have the capacity to reach a lot of teachers is we believe teachers are the core innovators in our education system. So forever, we've been an opt-in model, which means we don't go to school districts and train everyone. We actually require that the school districts collaborate with us to recruit the educators that want to do it. And ultimately, we also seek to build a larger community. We have 2,700 educators in our Facebook group. Most of them are free users who learn the model, pose questions, and get responses. We have our podcast. We have free resources and webinars. So at its core, we believe deeply in empowering as many educators to do this model. And if you can do the model without our help, just look at our free resources, please do it. If you think you need more support or you're a school or district who wants to see some real ripple effects with change, multi-cohorts, and educators spreading it to other educators, let us know. But we believe deeply that the educators are the ones that need to have a customizable model that creates change and allows them to meet their unique needs of their students more effectively. And if you want to see resources, our website is www.modernclassrooms.org. Our free course is learn.modernclassrooms.org. You can follow me at Kareem Farah 23 on Twitter. You can follow our social media tags at Modern Class Proj on Instagram and Twitter as well. But we're here to support. And if you ever have an idea, like any idea about how this model can live in a community, like I just spoke with a college professor wants to bring it to their college campus, just reach out. We love to kind of cultivate ideas. We think that the folks on the grounds are going to be the best at thinking about where this model fits and how. So never hesitate to reach out, and we'll likely reach back out and find a way to collaborate and chat.
Well, I appreciate today, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate all the free resources that you just offer for folks to go out there and hope to continue. So I think the networking that you have going on and the conversations that you're having is so on point. And just to restate you, the teacher is so important in all this work.
Absolutely.
And so I kudos to the work that you and your team has done, and we appreciate you spending your time with us. And on behalf of the Kentucky Valley Education Cooperative, this is Robert Brown. We hope to catch you on the next Digital Action podcast.